Today we're looking at a Vauxhall Corsa. It's a 2010 year model, makes it about 12 years old, and it's got just over 100,000 miles on the clock. Now the customers brought the car in complaining of a harsh sound coming from the front end of the vehicle when braking. So today we're going to be looking at the front brakes. So I'm going to start by having a quick provisional look at these front brakes through the wheel. Some wheels you can see them better than others. Now if you look through at this brake disc, you can see the lip is, well, there is quite a lip on there and there's quite a bit of corrosion. Also across the surface of the disc, it isn't clean and shiny like you'd expect it to be. There's quite a bit of surface rust, so I'm pretty sure the pad isn't making a good contact with that. Now the pads, they are a little bit difficult to see, especially with the camera. I don't think you're going to be able to see them, but they are down in there, and I can see they do look very low. So we will get the wheel off and have a better look. First off, I'm going to open the bonnet. We need to access the brake fluid reservoir, which on this model is over here in the corner, quite easily accessible. As we're working on the braking system and more than likely going to be replacing the front discs and pads, as you squeeze the piston back into the caliper, the fluid will come up into this reservoir and it will trickle out, so it's best to undo that rather than forcing the seal on there. I'll take that off. Now if at any point you do need to top up with brake fluid, it's a good idea to make sure you've got a new container and not one that's been sitting around on a shelf for a long time. Obviously you're not going to need 5 litres, you can buy smaller quantities. Brake fluid does absorb moisture, so it's a good idea to make sure you've got a fresh batch of fluid to use rather than something that's been sitting on the shelf for years. Now before we lift it up off the ground, as you can see I've got the luxury of a ramp. Of course you can use a trolley jack or something similar. It's always a good idea to crack these wheel nuts loose. Now you find on every wheel one of the nuts is a locking nut, and you will need the socket that comes with the car to undo that nut. That's 17mm, which is the same size as all the standard nuts on the car. It's a good idea to ask the customer when they drop the car off if they can point out where it is, because people keep it in all different places. So before we lift it off the ground, I'm just going to crack these wheel nuts loose. There we go. Okay, so I've got my impact gun here. Now I would say, as we've cracked them off, that's fine, but I wouldn't recommend using one of these on a locking wheel nut from, when it's tight. You do run the risk of breaking the thing, and then you're in real trouble. So make sure you support the wheel before you take the last one out. One wheel off. Right, now we're looking at the brake caliper. This is the rubber boot which protects the piston. That's the piston there. The next part is the metal backing of the brake pad. Then that piece there is the actual friction material, and that is the disc, which if I turn it, you can see it go round. You know, that pad's probably about, I don't know, half worn, so that's not too bad. But if we look on the pad on the outside of the disc, turn it round so you can see. So clearly that's the disc. The part down here, the skinny bit there's about 2 or 3 millimeters, which is the friction material. And that's the metal backing of the brake pad. So really we're just looking at this skinny bit here. There is only 2 to 3 mil left on that, so it is getting quite low. Combined with the rusty disc, I'd say there's a good chance that that could be the issue the lady is complaining about. Harsh sounding brakes from the front. Now we're going to remove the caliper and the disc, just get it stripped down basically. I always like to start by undoing these 2 little grub screws here. They're Torx 30, sometimes they're just a Phillips. A good tip, because they get rusty, is to give them a bit of a tap before you even start, just to shock it. See a lot of rust falling off there. I'm using a gun, but you can use, you know, just a Torx 30 bit and a ratchet. There we go. Now, always turn it round and lock. It just makes it a little bit easier to access these 2 13mm bolts, which we need to remove. Just a little shock to crack them loose. There we go. This one's a little bit tricky because the brake pipe's very close. I've got a ratchet spanner here, which should speed it up a little bit. That's one. That won't. It will come right out, but I'll just leave it there because I don't need to take it right out. That's the other one. So at the moment the piston is pushed out, squeezing the pads against the disc. I could probably lever the caliper off, but you could also use a screwdriver to pull the caliper across, which in turn pushes the piston in, so that gives you a little bit of wriggle room there. Caliper out, you can see the piston here, which I will need to squeeze back in. As I just showed you, you can use a screwdriver with it in situ and push the piston back in. Alternatively, you can use some grips like this, or a G-clamp, or you can use the proper piston wind back tool, but these are fine, and that's going back in nice and smooth. So I'm pretty certain that's not been sticking. That's a good sign. Now I'll leave that up there for now. These pads, that's another good thing to check, is that these are loose and free in the carrier, which, yeah, they're not too bad actually. When these carriers get corroded and rusted up, the pads can stick, and then when you put your foot on the brake and they're squeezing the disc tight, they don't release. So again, that gives you another symptom of a seized caliper. You can see this one is slightly different to this one. It's got the metal, like a little clip on there. That comes with the new pad. It's actually designed so when the friction material wears right down really low, there's your friction material, this touches the disc and makes a horrendous screeching noise, so you know it's time to get it looked at. Okay, so I'll get this carrier off next. We've just got 2 more bolts here. They're both 19mm. Again, I'm using my gun because I'm lazy and this is quicker. There you go, it's all falling apart now. So carrier lifts off, brake disc lifts off. Next, I'll show you the bits which are quite important to clean up to make sure it all functions smoothly as it should do. I've got the caliper carrier over here in the vise now, it just makes it a bit easier to clean. Only got a few tools there to use. One of the things to check while it's up here on the vise are these 2 sliders. Sometimes these rubber boots, they can split, perish, get a hole in them, the water gets in and the sliders stick. Again, another symptom of a seized brake caliper. As you can see, these are moving nice and easy. So I'm going to start by giving these little clips here that the pads sit in just a bit of a dust off with a wire brush. This does get a bit dusty, so make sure you're working in an area with plenty of fresh air. You might want to put a mask on. Okay. A lot of people stop there, but I think it's a good idea to actually take these clips off, only lever off, because underneath the rust can build up. So give those a little brush off. And more importantly, the actual carrier will need some attention. So I'll put these down here. Same again at the bottom. There we go. I've got a file which I'm not going to, go at it with this. It's just lightly to use to get any surface rust off. Same again at the bottom. You can have a little bit of a scrape around with a screwdriver if you need to. I don't think this is too bad. And then finally give it a bit of a dust off with a wire brush. As you can see, that's the reason we got the doors open now. These clips, they're normally not too bad. It's usually the carrier that's the issue, so I'll just give these a little dust off. There's a couple. I'll show you how these go back on. They've got 2 little ears there and there, which sit either side of this part that sticks out here. The longer tab on one side goes to the outside. You don't want it on the inside because this is where the disc runs. There you go. It just clips on. I'll carry on and do the other 3 and show you how to rebuild it back on the car. Now before I put the disc on, I just want to make sure this hub flange is clean. You really don't want to trap any flakes of rust or anything between that and the disc. That will give you brake judder. They're normally pretty clean, to be honest. So just give it that's a bit of brake cleaner, which you can pick up at any parts department. So now the brake disc, remembering to line up your 2 holes for the grub screws. Grub screws are purely there just to hold the thing all together while you're working on it, really. Perhaps I shouldn't have taken them out at the very first step. They don't need to be really tight. Okay, so I can turn the steering back round on the lock. Caliper carrier, which is all now nice and clean. So they're both started. I'll just do them up gently with the air gun and check them afterwards. So I'm using a ratchet here and a socket and obviously the air gun. You can just use a spanner. It really depends what you've got to hand. That's tight. That's tight. You will find for every fixing on the car there are torque figures. It just comes down to common sense, really. They're quite big bolts, they need to be done up tight. The caliper bolts are only 13mm, they're a lot smaller, so you need to nip those. Right, next to the brake pads, it's a good idea to get some copper grease to put on the ears of the brake pads where they make contact with the clips in the caliper, just to stop them from sticking, and helps to prevent brake squeal. Only needs a small coating. As you can see, that pad's got the metal clip we spoke about, so this one goes on the inside, the clip at the top. There we go. A little bit tricky for me to do the inside one from this side. There it goes. So there's your clip at the top. Make sure it goes on the inner pad. It's always only ever on the inside I've seen these. I think on the outside it probably runs a risk of fouling with the wheel. So here's the other pad. Put the ears into the clip, twist it round and push it in, and that's it. They're both in. That's normal. Scrolling on the disc, you can see the disc's got a protective coating of silver paint, just for really while it's sat in the box on the shelf to stop it rusting. That will wear off the first time you use your brakes. Right, so the caliper, we've already pushed the piston right back in. to accept the new pads. That bolt's still there. This part, it does twist. It's got two flats and one locates against that part of the caliper there, just to stop it from spinning while you're doing up the bolts. So make sure that's lined up. You can see there where it slots in, like so. Get these bolts started. Ratchet spanner. Ratchet spanner just makes it a little bit faster. You can use a normal spanner. There we go. I've got a slightly longer spanner which I've put on around the right way, just to make sure that they're nipped, and I'm happy with that. That's it, lovely. So now I'm satisfied that these two are tight, the two 19s are tight, the two little grub screws, they're nipped up. Put that back down straight. And you can hear the brake pads just touching the disc, which is perfect. It's free and easy to spin. Next we'll get the wheel back on. Wheel going on. A little bit fiddly to line up the bolt holes sometimes, especially when you're working down low. Luckily we're up quite high here. Chosen a deep 17mm socket purely because the bolts are recessed in quite a bit, and if you're trying to do it with your fingers it's very difficult. Give the wheel a little wriggle, make sure you get them all started before you do one up tight. Lastly, the locking one. Okay, so I'll just nip them up with a gun. As I said, don't go mad with the locking. That'll do. Next we'll drop it down on the floor and check the tightness. So as you can probably see, this is the driver's side, which I've just completed. Wheel back on. We didn't bother showing this because it is exactly the same procedure as the other side. So now we will lower the car down to the floor and check all the bolts. So with the vehicle back on the ground, we're just finishing up, nipping up the bolts on this side, and we're going to do the other side. As I said, there are tightening tool specifications for all bolts and fixings on a vehicle. The wheel bolts are about 110 Newton meters, but you will find that varies from one model to the other, and not everybody's got a torque wrench, so you know, just be sensible with it. Now that's tightened up, the next step is to get back under the bonnet. As you can see, took the cap off because the fluid level would come up, and it has come right up and trickled over the edge. Next important thing to do is pump the brake pedal now the vehicle is assembled again and back on the floor. Okay, so I'm ready to pump the pedal. You'll probably see the fluid go down slightly. You might not see a great deal of difference. The pedal's gone to the floor once, but it is back up again now. Probably not a lot of difference because there are new components in there which fill up the space in the caliper where we can press the piston back in. So that's clearly too much. On the side of the bottle there are markings, minimum and maximum. Now you can use pretty much anything to take the fluid out as long as it's clean. This I only ever use for brake fluid. It's just a small pipette. That could take some time, but I'll just carry on with that. Get it down to its maximum mark rather, and then we're done. I think we are almost there. That's it. We're there. So put the cap back on, tighten that up. Now as I've spilt a bit, brake fluid also makes a brilliant paint stripper, so don't get it on your bodywork of the car. If you do get on the bodywork, just grab yourself a bit of water and wash it off. That'll be fine for down there. If you get it on the bodywork, use a soft cloth and a bit of water. More water the better really. That'll dilute it down and wash it off. Okay, that pretty much sums up the front brakes on a Vauxhall Corsa. Most importantly, before you move the car, you've already made sure everything's tight, and I did pump the pedal, but once you're sitting in there, make sure you're happy with the brake pedal before you start it up and move it. Should be pretty firm. When you're happy with that, take it for a run around the block. With these brake discs, as I showed you, they are coated with paint, and the first few applications of the brake pedal will sound a bit harsh where they're wearing off. But after that, it should be a nice, smooth, quiet ride.